Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. And in case you haven't guessed, in case you can't place where this epic theme music is coming from, of course, it is none other than the theme music for X-Men the Animated Series, which was a staple of my childhood back in 92 when that epic show premiered on Fox and ran till 1997. It was one of the greatest animated TV shows to ever hit your television screen. I loved it, and millions of others loved this show. And it just ended. It just ended in 97. It look, even those who weren't into comic books, who weren't into the X-Men like that, enjoyed the X-Men animated series. If you were into the comic books, you really enjoyed it because it was so accurate. It was like picking up the comics and actually seeing the comics in motion. Now, they made some changes throughout, but it was still interesting, and the changes they made were good changes. They weren't just making changes for change's sake. And if you weren't into the comic books, it was so compelling, the storytelling, it got people into comic books. But the show abruptly ended on September of 1997, and a lot of people were upset, me included, that the show ended. But everything has to come to an end. But we know that on this Wednesday, March the 20th, which is a glorious day because it is also my birthday. And so the greatest birthday present you could give me at Disney is to release X-Men 97. Yes, the continuation of the 90s X-Men the Animated Series. Oh my goodness. Just years in the making. Years in the making. And finally, we're getting it. And that show will pick up right where it left off on September 20th, 1997. A day that would live in infamy. But we are picking right back up for all who have been longing for this for 30 years almost, I mean, I've been wanting to go back into it. And thank God for Disney Plus, because I was able to go back and watch the entire run of X-Men, the animated series. I watched it all. Once they released that trailer for X-Men 97, I was like, man, I got to get back into it. I got to dive back into this world, to see if I'm truly excited for this. Because I felt excited. I was hyped up because that trailer had all type of emotions going through. I was just feeling like that 16, 17, 18-year-old Kevin sitting on his mama's couch eating Funyuns and watching the X-Men animated series. And all of that came back. And so I wanted to go back and watch the show, because this new show is basically the same animation style. They have a few of the voice actors returning to voice the characters they voiced back in 1997. And so it is a true trip down memory lane for this show. And I'm here for it. And so I decided, in honor of the release, or the return, I should say, of X-Men 97 on March the 20th on Disney Plus, we're going to review the entire 5 seasons of his initial run that aired on Fox. Now, I'm not going episode by episode. Don't worry about that. Don't trip about that. But more or less storylines that went on. And another problem, when Fox aired this show, it was out of order. They released it out of order, and it made no sense. Back then, it didn't bother me. Back then, it was like, whatever. I just wanted to see X-Men. But as you got older, you realize, like, this doesn't make any sense. You know, we left off on a cliffhanger and now we on a different story and all this. Fox really messed over this show. But once again, Disney Plus, they re-released it and you can binge watch all 5 seasons, and they released it in order the way it was intended to be seen. So that was a plus. And that's great because there's so many storylines and you can break it down season by season, episode to episode. Sometimes they have some two-parters in there. They have some actually season long threads that last, and it was just interesting, very unique for its time and for its genre as far as an animated series is concerned, that you have long form storytelling, linear storytelling, and this show nailed it. Now they have shows that came out around that era that did the same thing, the Spider-Man animated series and so on and so forth, but this kind of started it. It just pretty much started it. And a lot of the stories here, which is no brainers, some of the movies that came out later on had storylines from this show, which is, I guess you could say, from the comics, because this show was ripped from the comics. But that's how I remembered most of them, because I didn't get a chance to catch up on every X-Men comic, even though I'm a huge X-Men fan because of its messaging and what the X-Men was initially created for. But I didn't get to follow every single storyline in the comics. So this show helped me with that, get me caught up with that and made me want to go back and pick up some of the comics. And that's how I was able to pick up the fact that there were some changes made, throughout the show. But they weren't horrible changes, like I said before. But we're going to go into the X-Men in case you don't know what the X-Men are. And then we'll get into the reviews. The X-Men are a superhero team created by artist and co-writer Jack Kirby and editor and co-writer Stan Lee. The team first appeared in the X-Men #1 in September of 1963. Although initially canceled in the 1970s due to low sales, following its 1975 revival and direction under writer Chris Claremont, it became one of the most recognizable and successful franchises in Marvel Comics. The X-Men had appeared in numerous books, television shows, Disney's 20th Century Fox X-Men films, and in video games. The video game was fire. The one that released the arcade game, I remember that from back in the day when we had arcades, back in my day. But anywho's, the X-Men title may refer to the superhero team itself, but the comic series or the broader franchise included several solo titles and team books such as the New Mutants, Excalibur, X-Force, and so on. In the Marvel Universe, mutants are humans who are born with a genetic trait called the X gene, which grants them natural superhuman abilities, generally manifesting during puberty. Due to their differences from the majority of humanity, mutants are subject to prejudice and discrimination. Many X-Men stories feature social commentary on bigotry, injustice, and other political themes. The X-Men have fought against a variety of enemies. This includes other mutants, human bigots, supervillains, mystical threats, extraterrestrial threats, and artificial intelligence, even that some may say we're fighting against now. In most iterations of the team, they are led by its founder, Charles Xavier, also known as Professor X, a powerful telepath who runs a school for mutant children out of his mansion in Westchester, New York, which secretly is also the headquarters of the X-Men. Their stories have frequently included Magneto, a powerful mutant with control over magnetic fields and basically control metal as well. His old friend, he is an old friend, I should say, of Professor X, and has been an ally as well as a villain. They've always had that back and forth, and I always compare them to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. They had that same vibe. To put it plainly, I always looked at Professor X as Martin Luther King Jr., nonviolent, uh, trying to achieve equality, and not Professor, but Magneto was Malcolm X by any means necessary. But at the end of the day, they both had the same goal. It was for the empowerment of mutants, for mutants to be treated equally. And just like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., who wanted blacks to feel equal or to be equal. The feeling that's on you. Because there are some that are that walk around here who feel equal, but I can assure them they're not. But I digress. But that's just a brief history of the X-Men and what they came to be, how they came to be, and who they are. And there are so many popular characters that come out of here. The number one is, of course, Wolverine. Wolverine sticks out like a sore thumb. Everybody loves Wolverine. I always adored Wolverine. I always felt Wolverine was one of my favorites for one fundamental fact. It wasn't his healing ability. It wasn't the adamantium claws that come out of his hands. It wasn't even the skeleton, the adamantium skeleton. It was the fact that he was 5'2". And the reason that appeared to me, because I'm short. I'm not 5'2", but I was short. But Wolverine kind of gave me confidence because Wolverine was the shortest of all of them. He was just a little guy, but he was stocky, But he was the biggest in the room because of his attitude, because of the way he presented himself, because of the way he conducted himself. He was never short. He was the biggest guy in the room, even though stature wise he was the shortest, and that gave me confidence. That's why I always look to Wolverine in that light, even though I adore Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Love him as Wolverine. Can't wait to see him again in Deadpool and Wolverine that comes out later this year. Hugh Jackman is what, 6'5"? He's so tall. And I know where you're gonna find a 5' nothing actor who can embody this role. I don't know. But at the same time, even though Hugh Jackman didn't appearance wise look like Wolverine, his attitude, his what's the word I'm looking for here? Well, him. He's him. He embodies Wolverine through and through. The only thing missing is the height thing. If you cut him off at the knees, he's the perfect Wolverine. He's the perfect Wolverine. But I love Hugh Jackman in the role, and it got to the point I didn't even care how tall he was. When I saw the first X-Men movie in 2000, I was like, man, he's tall. He's too tall. He's taller than everybody. He was taller than Sabretooth. I'm like, man, this is impossible. No, I can't. I'm not gonna get with this. But I mean, what can I say? Hugh Jackman is Wolverine. It's just that. Yeah, the comics Wolverine, the TV show Wolverine, perfect, man. He was just everything that I loved about him in the comics. It was displayed in the animated series as well. Another standout, of course, is Gambit. Gambit stood out with me because Gambit was from down here. Gambit had that Creole accent. He was, he was a ladies' man, or at least he was trying to be one, and he was just cool. I loved Gambit in the comic as well as the animated series. And this was some of the things that I questioned what 20th Century Fox was doing with their movies. They did. How can you not include Gambit? They put him in that horrible Wolverine movie, the Origins, X-Men Origins, and the dude did a good job who played Gambit, but eh, it's, it just didn't work, man. It just did not work. It was a head scratcher to why they waited so long to put him in the movie. He's one of the X-Men. Put him in there, and there's so much story behind it. And that was the frustrating thing with those movies. It was so much rich history from the comics you can cherry pick from, and they didn't do it. They just ruined it. They really ruined those movies. But we'll do a show on the X-Men films in a couple of months. I already have that one penciled in around the release of Deadpool and Wolverine. But in any event, the third and final one that stuck out to me was Rogue. Rogue was one of my favorites in the comics, and I loved her on the show. Didn't care for her in the movies because they really betrayed that character, but I loved her in the show and in the comics for several reasons. One, Mississippi girl, you know, Mississippi girl. My folks are from Mississippi, so there was a connection there. Secondly, she was the most powerful, or one of the most powerful, because she has the ability to absorb uh, uh, your life force or your energy or your mutant ability. And she had absorbed Miss Marvel. Yes, Miss Marvel abilities, and was able to retain them. Now, when she did it to somebody else, she can only keep it for so long. But when she touched Miss Marvel, she kept it. That's how she was able to fly and have this superhuman strength. Actually, have all the abilities Miss Marvel had. Rogue was one of my favorites, and her story was so tragic. You know, all of these characters have a tragic story, man. There's nothing bubbly about these superheroes, about this team. Nothing. And that's why I love the show, because it wasn't for kids, even though it was for kids. If it makes sense, it was so much adult storylines, you know, and I was around the age when I was about to get into adulthood, so it opened the door for me there. But for little kids, I don't think it was too much too much to come spring from there. But whatever, it's just a constant reminder that comic books aren't for kids. You know, when people talk, I get my mind get blown when I tell people I read comic books. You know, and they look at me like I don't know, like I'm slow or something. Like, you still look at comic book? Yeah, you know, it's, you know. And then the number one comment, the number one response, oh, aren't those for kids? My number one response is read one. Just pick one up and read it. I guarantee you won't feel it's for kids. You pick up a comic book. There's nothing kiddie about these comics. Nothing. And that goes back to when I was growing up reading them. There's nothing kiddie about them. Nothing. And so I laugh at that. That blows my mind. People always look like, oh, you nerdy, you're a geek, and all this other stuff. All right, read one. Read one, and tell me after, is it geeky or nerdy or kiddie? Especially the X-Men. X-Men get into some real deep subject matter, some poignant subject matters. You know, I mentioned earlier how it tackles social injustice, bigotry, racism, sexism. All that is in these books, you know, and it's not there for any explorative thing. It's there for knowledge. It's there to speak out against it. You know, mutants, I like to use it as a metaphor. Mutants are a metaphor, you know, for those who are being oppressed. And everybody can relate to mutants. Everybody, you know, I don't care who you are, what race, religion, culture, gender, whatever it is, you can relate to a mutant. And that's what makes X-Men so poignant and such a staple in pop culture to this day. But let's dive into X-Men, the animated series, which is an animated superhero television series that debuted in the United States on Halloween, October the 31st, 1992. I was 13 when this show when this show premiered. It premiered on Fox Kids, little block that they had at the time, and it was Marvel Comics' second attempt at an animated X-Men TV series. After the pilot X-Men Pride of the X-Men was not picked up. And I kind of vaguely remember them talking about it. I never seen it, of course. But I vaguely remembered that it focused on Kitty Pride, hence the title. And it was narrated by Stan Lee. I don't know much about it, but I just remembered that it didn't go through, and they kind of settled on this version, which is fine because if this is considered settling, boy, I'm all for it. But it all started in March of 1990 when Margaret Lauch became head of Fox Children's Television, having championed the pride of the X-Men pilot in 1989. She ordered 13 episodes of X-Men. Saban Entertainment was contacted to produce the show and hired a smaller studio, Graz Entertainment, to produce episodes because at the time they lacked sufficient staff to handle the in-house production. So Graz employed the creative staff, wrote and designed each episode, and drew the storyboards. The voice work was done through Canadian studios, and South Korean studio ACOM was hired to animate episodes. X-Men was originally set to premiere over Labor Day weekend in September. However, due to production delays, it was delayed to the end of October. When ACOM turned in the first episode, it contained several animation errors, which they refused to fix because of time constraints. The episode was aired in an unfinished form. When Fox, re-aired the pilot in early 1993, the errors were corrected. The second episode was submitted just before the deadline with 50 scenes missing and a single day reserved for editing. The two-part episode, Night of the Sentinels, aired originally as a sneak preview Halloween, October the 31st, 1992. Because of the production delays and animation errors, Fox threatened to sever ACOM's contract. The series earned top ratings throughout its first season and was renewed for a second with 13 episodes. Throughout its run, producers had to deal with quality control issues, including attempts to cut costs and requests to change the tone of the show to more child-friendly storylines, so to speak. The show was originally planned to run for 65 episodes, but as a result of its success, Saban funded 11 more episodes, albeit with a reduced budget due to Marvel's bankruptcy at the time. The series was added to the streaming service Disney Plus following its launch in November of 2019 with a revival, X-Men 97, to be released on the platform March the 20th. Yeah, it was an interesting show to watch, mainly because not only for all of those reasons, the behind the scenes reasons, but when Fox released them, I said earlier, they released them out of order. It was so frustrating to watch the show, but it was so good. And you could tell later as the episodes, as we got deeper into the seasons, that the tone shifted. It wasn't as heavy because the first two seasons, especially, the first two seasons were heavy. Deep subject matter. It was not for kids, even though it came on the Fox Kids network. But hey, I wasn't mad at it. I enjoyed it because I read the comics, and it was pretty accurate with the comics. The comics aren't kiddie, as I keep beating on the drum to say. And so, that was the result that we got. Now, the synopsis of X-Men, the animated series. The show features the team similar to that as the early 1990s X-Men comics by Jim Lee. Specifically, the Blue Team, established early on its X-Men Volume 2. It consists of Cyclops, Wolverine, Rogue, Storm, Beast, Gambit, Jubilee, Jean Grey, and of course, Charles Xavier, as well as an originally created character for the show, Morph, who is basically based on Chainling in the comics, but on the show, he's Morph. And Morph, even though spoilers, he dies in the first episode. he he does has a lasting effect for a couple of seasons there, because we find out that he's not dead. And so there's a lot going on there with that character and how it affects the rest of the X-Men, and what happened in the episode that he died, where Cyclops made the ultimate choice to choose the team over Morph and leave him behind, him and Beast behind. And Beast got captured and Morph got killed. And it essentially, tore the team apart a bit. They still worked together, but it was still a rift there with that decision and questions of Cyclops' leadership of the team. All 76 episodes were directed by Larry Houston. The series dealt with social issues, which include divorce, Christianity, the Holocaust, AIDS, loneliness, depression. They ran the gambit on a lot of issues throughout his run. It crossed over with another Marvel animated show that was, I love that show as well, Spider-Man, the animated series, when Spider-Man seeks the X-Men's help to stop his progressing mutation. He was turning into a mutant. That's when he was sprouting out 2 more arms or whatever, 6 more arms out of his side. And it was pretty much an abbreviated form of the Secret War storylines from the comics, when the Beyonder and Madam Web, not Dakota Johnson, but from the comics, Madam Web selected Spider-Man to lead a team of heroes against a group of villains. And so it was just a kind of a abbreviated version of that storyline in the comics. But in earlier draft of Secret Wars, it did involve all the X-Men, but transporting the voice cast from Canada to Los Angeles, where the production of the Spider-Man animated series was based, had been deemed a little too costly. It was a little steep there, so they had to cut costs in that regard. And so the episode was rewritten to feature only Storm, who only appeared in the episode because of the actress who voiced her on the show lived in Los Angeles. And so that's how Storm popped up on that episode in that crossover. In the first season of X-Men the animated series, the X-Men came into conflict with human conspirators building Sentinel robots to kill mutants, as well as Magneto's plan to instigate a human mutant war and the powerful mutant Apocalypse plan to eradicate the weak. Other storylines included X-Men members Morph's death at the hands of the Sentinels, Beast's incarceration, which I think he was incarcerated the whole first season. And also Apocalypse minions attempting to assassinate U.S. Senator Kelly to turn humans against mutants. And that first season was so deep. And I believe that's the reason why this show is so beloved, because it came out hot. It didn't hold anything back. It wasn't a what should I say, a cookie cutter version of the source material. They went all in and they kept it real. They kept it true to the X-Men lore Even though, like I said before, there were changes made throughout the show, including this season. There were changes made from the comics to the animated series, just like they change it in film. You know, whenever you switch medias, there's going to be changes. So, you know, I expected that, but at the same time, it kept the tone. It kept everybody's character precisely how they are in the comics. None of that was deviated. None of that was changed. None of that was tinkered with. I mean, we open up with the first 2 episodes of that season. I guess I'm not going to go through every episode. There's 76 of them. We're not going to do that today. My brain won't allow it. But those first 2 episodes, it was a two-parter. Night of the Sentinels. This is where we get introduced to Jubilee, and the first exposure to Jubilee in I guess a motion form other than the comics. And I often wondered why Jubilee wasn't so heavily used in the film. Actually, wasn't used at all in the films. But she played such an important part in the animated series as well as the comics. But they didn't touch her in the movies. I'm like, man, why? It makes no sense because her story is so cool. Actually, her story was kind of duplicated by Rogue in the film, which is cool. I get it, but at the same time, I would have much rather to see Jubilee because I love that character on the show. But we do get the introduction to the Sentinels, and the Sentinels, man, the Sentinels were everything that they were supposed to be on this show. They were they were frightening. They were I don't know the word. I don't know the right adjective to describe them, but they definitely were a thorn in the X-Men side, in all mutants side here. But really love that we get the introduction to Magneto a couple of episodes later, and I love the way that every episode throughout this first season was kind of a introduction to every X-Men slick style. You know, it wasn't like Wolverine heavy or Rogue heavy or Cyclops heavy. It was just their story, but a lot more going on around it, and it was easy to follow. It wasn't like it was so much going on you couldn't keep up. It was easy to follow because everybody's story really connects, you know, and it made it was like a family, the X-Men. It was truly a family, and you saw family elements throughout. And now moving on to season 2, which premiered in October of 1993, we open up season 2 with the wedding of all weddings. This was when Cyclops and Jean Grey got married, and this was also a two-parter. And this is when we get introduced to Mr. Sinister and his nasty boys. and this is when we get reintroduced to Morph. We find out that Morph's alive and he's being brainwashed by Mr. Sinister to the point where he is the reverend or the priest, whoever was officiating the wedding. That's who that was. So he went come to find out that Jean and Scott legally aren't married. So there's that. Then you have the love triangle coming into play where where we see that Wolverine is all toe up, baby, because Jean is marrying Cyclops. And for all of the younger viewers watching at the time, you're like, man, are you supposed to feel bad for Wolverine? I mean, he's trying to step on Scott, man. But I mean, the way that was handled, and it's handled like that in all mediums when it comes to the X-Men, this love triangle, because it is an interesting storyline. But one of my favorite episodes of the series was I forgot the name of the episode or the title of the episode, but it is when Storm had to go back to Africa. She went to Mount Kilimanjaro, where to battle the Shadow King. And we find out that she has a spiritual son or or a son. So she goes with Rogue, and I always found that episode interesting. And so I really really enjoyed that episode. That was in season 2, the episode where Gambit had to return home uh to Louisiana or wherever the bayou was where where he's from. We assume Louisiana, and help out his family, so to speak. We also get the introduction to Cable in the future, and in one of these episodes, it was a really good season. It wasn't as good as the first season, but there were some points throughout that were very very interesting, and kept me invested. Kept a lot of people invested back in 1993 and 94. But we move on to season 3, and season 3 holds one of the best sagas ever. This was a 5-part episode in the middle of this season, and it was none other than the Phoenix Saga. 5 episodes. And what made it so cool, this wasn't week to week that they ran this. This came on every day. It came on for a week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's how epic of a story this was. It was epic in the comics, so it had no other choice but to be epic in the animated series. Why they couldn't do it film wise, I still don't understand. And they tried it not once, but twice and messed them both up. But in any event, the animated series did not. They nailed it, and I think that's why Fox, or 20th Century Fox at the time, tried so hard to nail it, because they tried it twice and couldn't get it right, because the animated series did it perfectly, and they just tried to duplicate it. But I would have settled for a carbon copy. But the problem was the honest problem was why they couldn't translate it over to film properly, because they didn't set it up properly. They did 1 or 2 movies, and then okay, Dark Phoenix, The Last Stand. What was The Last Stand. And then that other one, Dark Phoenix, that was even worse. Actually, no, I can't even compare the two. They both were horrible. They they were just horrible. But yeah, we get introduced to the Phoenix Force. We get introduced to Banshee. We get introduced to Black Tom Cassidy. It was a Goliath. Gladiator, not Goliath. Gladiator. A lot of characters came out of this storyline, and it was, oh my god, beautiful. Uh, Saved the show, because it was like I said, season 1 was great. Season 2 was all right, but easily could have, he could have did without, and slipped into obscurity, but they saved it in season 3 with the Phoenix Saga, and the world is better for it. They even came back later on in the season and did the Dark Phoenix Saga, and so they they doubled down in season 3. They knew where they were hitting at. Now this wasn't as big as the Phoenix Saga. I think there was only 4 parts, by 1 episode. Woo woo. But it wasn't as big. Now it was as tragic, but it's all rolled up together. It's still great television, great animation, great storytelling. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, season 3 is probably the best season because of that. Because you had those 2 epic stories in 1 season. It is bananas that that they pulled that off. Um season 4 is when it kind of started to dip. They really started to dip hard, because they kind of crescendoed with the Phoenix and the Dark Phoenix, and I think around this time they were changing animation style and story style. It kind of pulling back on some of the tone, and you could tell. You could tell it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't horrible. It was watchable. It's still watchable, but it was like, oh man, this is different. This is different. It just didn't have that same appeal as the first three seasons of this show. Some of the stories were kind of just thrown together with no rhyme or reason. It felt like it was just it was non-linear. It felt like they were just putting out episodes. Now they did have a four-parter towards the end of this season. Beyond Good and Beyond Good and Evil, part 1, 2, 3, and 4. That was all right, but yeah, man, didn't have that same appeal. Just didn't have the same appeal. It was good. It just wasn't as good as the Phoenix Saga and all that there. And so, but that was meant to end the show. That was meant to end the series, period, after the fourth season. But as I said before, Saban Entertainment financed the final season, the fifth and final season. And this season, you can tell they kind of changed the animation style. I think animation companies, it just didn't look right. It looked like a different animation studio took care of this final season, and it just threw it off. I mean, you had some good stories in this season. I think there was 11 episodes or something like that, but it wasn't. It just you didn't have any stories, any sagas. I think you have one two-parter in here, but the rest were singular episodes. They should have left it alone at 4. I'll put it that way, and it kind of left you feeling blah, and especially the last episode. The last episode is like, man, are you serious, man? And then that last episode, we find out that Professor Xavier is dying, and it was a cool episode because of, Magneto is attacking, about to attack the humans, and he finds out that Xavier is dying, and he stops the attack out of respect for Xavier. That's how much respect and love and respect he has for him, and it that was cool. I love that. I love that element of it, and it wasn't just in this episode. It's throughout, throughout the series. But that was the ultimate sign of respect. And he and the X-Men gathered together outside the X Mansion as Xavier's body leaves and goes. I forgot where they went, but yeah, that was the end. Graduation Day. That was the name of the episode, and it aired on September the 20th, 1997. Hence, why the new series will be named X-Men 97, because it's picking up right where they left off at. So that is a plus. But yeah, that's the series of the X-Men animated series. 5 epic seasons of television. I mean, we don't get this no more. 76 episodes of a series. I mean, think about it. Now, one season is like 8 episodes, 10 if you're lucky, And so a show will have to run for like 10 years or around 10 years in order to get these type of numbers. But we were getting 13, 12 episode seasons out of these shows, and just amazing storylines throughout. It was beautiful to watch. It was a beautiful thing. Even the episodes that were poo poo kitty, they were good. You still rocked with it because of the characters and the the performances by the voice actors and all this here. You was invested. Hence the excitement for X-Men 97. It is going to be epic. I am so ready for this. And what makes it so beautiful is a nostalgia high out this world. because it's the same animation style. They're using some of the same actors to voice the characters. They're picking up where they left off. It's everything that 17 or 18-year-old Kevin um dreamed of when that last episode aired on September the 20th, 1997. And so, yeah, it took a minute. It took what, 25 years, 26 years, but we're here. It was, will it be worth the wait? I don't know. But X-Men the animated series, which aired on Fox Kids from 1992 to 1997, gets a letter grade of a B plus. One of the best animated TV shows ever made. I love it. It was like, even for those, and I think I mentioned this earlier. I did so much talking. I think that even those people who didn't read the comic books and watch the show really connected with the show, and they grew a love for comic books. Because I know a couple of people personally who enjoyed this show so much they actually started reading comic books when I was younger. And so that's how important it was. And to have the crossovers with X-Men, not well, of course with but with Spider-Man, I think that was in 94 or 95 when they did that crossover. Only 2 episodes, and it wasn't a big crossover like I said before because they couldn't afford for the actors to go record in Los Angeles. But that was cool. That was before the MCU, before you get these cinematic universes and crossover films and stuff like that. So it was cool to see that on the small screen, and it was a joy to be a part of. Those of a certain generation, which is mine, you had a really good time. You were blessed as a child, because I look at television now and these animated shows, the cartoons and stuff. I'm like, man, these kids, no wonder they on their phones all the time. It's nothing to watch. There is nothing interesting to watch. Cartoon Network barely show cartoons now. You know what I'm saying? It's horrible for these kids. That's why it's great that we have Disney Plus and streaming services like that, where you can go back and watch these shows and watch them with your kids and like, look, this is what I watched when I was your age and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this show coming up. My daughter is looking forward to watching it with me, even though she didn't watch the original animated series, but she's excited to watch this with me. So that'll be my birthday present this upcoming week. I would like to know, are you excited for X-Men 97, which will be premiering on Disney Plus March the 20th? Let me know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network, as well as YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel. Like this video as well. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this trip down memory lane as we went back into the crate and went over X-Men, the animated series, in preparation for X-Men 97. Oh boy, I cannot wait. I get chills every time I say it. I can't wait till the 20th for so many reasons. So happy early birthday to me. I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love one another. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.